Chances are you've seen one before without even realizing. The average person walks past multiple deranged killers in their lifetime without knowing. Serial killers are a special branch of murderers, one with a distinct, warped purpose in mind. They kill simply because they want to live in a fantasy, one in which they control. In the case of Andrei Chikatilo, it was sexual pleasure driving his passion for murder. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936 in Yablochny, a small village in rural Ukraine. At the time, Ukraine was a fundamental part of the Soviet Union, and hardship and famine was a widespread epidemic for those under Stalin's oppressive rule. Andrei's childhood was characterized by the terrors of deprivation and bombings from Germany during the Second World War. Aside from a traumatic childhood, he suffered from a genetic disorder known as hydrocephalus, or water on the brain. This means that excess cerebrospinal fluid ends up in the ventricles, which causes pressure within the head and many genital urinary tract issues that burdened him later in life. These problems include bedwetting and the inability to maintain an erection. Chikatilo eventually married in 1963 and produced 2 offspring despite his sexual issues and hatred for conventional intercourse. He became a teacher and moved from place to place after complaints of harassing children until finally settling in Rostov. There were definite precursors as to why he committed his murders. In famine-ravaged Ukraine, cannibalism wasn't an uncommon practice. It is believed that Chikatilo's brother was actually eaten by his family's neighbors. Chikatilo was also extremely shy, too afraid to talk to girls. He was constantly made fun of for his lack of sexual experience, for his only sexual encounter occurred at age 15 when he raped a young girl. Andrei Chikatilo murdered his first victim on December 22, 1978. 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova. He lured her into an abandoned shed and raped her, slashing her with a knife and ejaculating on the spot. This attack was proof of his psychological connection between sex and violence, and though he was questioned, a previously convicted sex offender was put to death for his crime instead. The next 3 years went by with no documented victims for Chikatilo, too scared to come back out again. He continued to face scrutiny for molesting children and found it impossible to receive another teaching post. He then began working as a supply clerk in a factory. On September 3, 1981, he murdered another child, 17-year-old Larissa Kashenko. Once he got a taste for the killing, there was almost no stopping him. He continued to lure in young runaways from both sexes, becoming acquainted with the kids and then raping them. He would initiate the attacks on his victims with slashes across the eye sockets, often removing the eyeballs completely. In most cases, he even went as far as to consume their sexual organs.
As Chikatilo's killing spree continued, tensions were high in the Soviet Union. People in the region became suspicious of the killings and linked them to foreign terror attacks or even the possibility of werewolf attacks. One man, Major Mikhail Fedosov, did not believe these rumors, however. He believed in the possibility of a rampant serial killer in the region. Detective Fedosov dedicated the next several years to the capturing of Chikatilo, but was unsuccessful. However, after years of escaping and committing dozens of murders, Chikatilo ultimately slipped up. On November 6, 1990, after the killing of his last victim, Sveta Korostik, Chikatilo was spotted nearby in the area committing suspicious activity. The police linked his name to previous crimes committed in 1984, so they started to follow him around. When he's arrested on November 20th, Chikatilo refused to admit he committed the murders, despite the overwhelming amount of evidence against him. He ended up being interrogated by the psychiatrist Alexander Buchanovsky, who was able to get him to admit to killing 53 victims. He described each of the murders in extreme and gruesome detail. After speaking to the psychiatrist, Chikatilo was found to be sane and fit to stand trial. Throughout the trial, it seemed to be a foregone conclusion that Chikatilo would be ruled guilty. There was an overwhelming amount of incriminating evidence against him. Surprisingly, however, the verdict was only reached after 2 months of deliberating. On October 15, 1992, Chikatilo was found guilty of committing 52 out of a possible 53 murders. He was sentenced to death for these murders. On February 14, 1994, Chikatilo was executed by a bullet to the back of his head. The execution brought the end of nearly 2 decades of terror and violence in the Soviet Union. The impact of Andrei Chikatilo goes far beyond the murders of his 52 victims. The killings of Chikatilo became legendary among the people of the Soviet Union, creating the story of a maniacal serial killer and rapist bent on the suffering of others. Chikatilo's case revolutionized the entire scope of murder cases in the Soviet Union. The work of the psychiatrist Buchanovsky gave him the reputation as one of the world's leading minds in forensic sexual murder crimes.